You know the feeling of having had a long day and then you go to class and then you have to sit and listen to the instructor talk and yap on about 16 different focus points whenever you're doing a technique to be able to go from A to B. Today we're going to be talking about how we learn and how we can improve the learning speed whenever we're trying to learn jiu-jitsu or basically anything that has to do with movement or the body. So at the moment, there's this debate going on in the jiu-jitsu community about whether or not we should move away from the traditional way of receiving instructions and drilling techniques and then moving more towards an ecological dynamics approach where you're doing or what's called the constraint-led approach, where you're doing more task-specific stuff, more goal-oriented movements, or we can still call them drills, instead of doing the static drilling where there's no resistance. It's not static because you're moving, but people refer to it as static drilling because there's no resistance. The opponent is just letting you do whatever it is you want to do. And I think it's an interesting debate. And personally, I've arrived at a point where I feel that the static drilling or the very compliant form of drilling obviously confers some benefit in terms of moving your body around. And if you are joining jiu-jitsu and you have very little experience in other forms of movement, like physical activity in general, maybe it's a nice way to get into practice. You use it as warm-up so you don't jump into more higher intensity. But on the other side, you could also plan your constraint-led approach training in a way where you're progressively building up intensity so it doesn't have to be a problem. But at the moment, the way I see it, when I look at videos over YouTube and talk to people, it's either black or white. And I feel like there's a pretty huge separation that's going on. And I think maybe there's some middle ground where you can actually meet in terms of understanding how we actually learn movement. Because I think if you try to listen to the people that are very much entrenched in ecological dynamics, they'll be using a lot of terms that in order for you to actually understand what it is that they're saying, you need to read the literature and you need to understand these concepts that they have made up. And it's not that it's wrong, but it's you look at the world in a certain way and then you need a concept to describe what's going on. And there's a lot of terms and terminology in the ecological dynamics that can be pretty difficult for just like normal people to understand. So I think a different way of looking at this and to start to have a conversation is just to kind of look at how do we learn just like on a meta level, how do we learn to do anything basically? And I've been teaching martial arts and movement and fitness and other stuff for over 20 years now. I have a master's degree in physical education and sports. So we've been looking at a lot of literature in terms of understanding how the body actually learns to do something, or rather the body doesn't learn to do anything, but the brain and the nervous system learns to do stuff. And if we look at just from a very basic level, your whole nervous system is geared and wired towards solving tasks. So this is how everything organizes. And if you just keep that in mind, and every time you're in class, every time you're trying to learn something, you can ask the question, what task am I trying to solve? Because then things will usually organize themselves in order for you to accomplish this task. So my point is that a technique that has 16 or 17 focus points or steps for you to arrive from A to B is too much for the body to remember and comprehend in something that is as complex as jiu-jitsu and something that is happening very fast. And I've been to multiple seminars with world-class athletes that are teaching the techniques that they use. And oftentimes, this is what I experience. They will teach something and they will go through all the steps to get from A to B, and it's usually a lot. And after the class, very few people can actually remember what all the steps are. And I bet you if you ask them 2 or 3 days after, few people will remember what they actually did. They might be able to remember the endpoints. So where did we go from and where did we end up? And maybe something in between. But unless you're on the autistic spectrum, which maybe a lot of people that do jiu-jitsu are, it's very difficult to understand all of these things. And as soon as the opponent does something that is outside of the box, what do you do then? And then you just have to remember, what task am I trying to solve? Where am I trying to get to? It's like we are overcomplicating things in jiu-jitsu a little bit when we're trying to add all these steps in. And if we take a step back and if we look at other disciplines, let's say we look at just like physical strength and conditioning. Let's say we're learning to do a deadlift. The analogy to what we're doing in jiu-jitsu would be whenever we have to teach someone to pick something heavy off the ground, we would then tell them, like, you need to place your feet like this. The bar needs to be like this. You need to grab it like this. You need to pull it to here, but not to here. And then you need to do this with your knees. You need to extend the knees, but at the same time, you're also extending the hips and you're keeping your back straight, and your shoulders need to rise as your hips and your knees are extending. And then you have to remember that you can't bend your back, so you need to keep your back straight. And you also need to remember to tighten your abs, you need to tighten your back muscles, and you need to squeeze your butts. Not your butts, but your butt muscles. That's a lot of things, and it's not necessarily wrong, but it's too much information. Now, I've been teaching physical education and I've been teaching fitness for many years, and I'm also teaching other people how to relay this information and how to teach other people in functional fitness. And I see this all the time. I see people in fitness doing the exact same thing that we're doing in jiu-jitsu. We're overcomplicating things, because you could also just say in a deadlift, you're not going to deadlift max to begin with. So you could just say, I want you to grab the bar and I want you to stand up with it. Try to do this 5 times. And then what happens is people will do it and they will get a feel for how is it to do this movement. Is it heavy? Is it awkward? What's going on when the bar leaves the ground? A lot of input and a lot of feelings will be experienced. And then what you can do after this is then you can try to improve on it. But I have this experience from the gym that I was training in earlier on, and I came to class. It was in the afternoon. We were doing like a gi session, and the guy teaching is a very talented guy. He's very good at jiu-jitsu. But he was explaining the technique and I started counting steps. And I think he had 16 or 15 steps to get from point A to point B. And the thing that struck me the most was I was looking at the time, and it took him 9 minutes to explain everything that we were doing and what they'd done the week before. But it took 9 minutes from the class started until we were actually moving as participants. And I always say, whenever people are teaching or doing an instruction in something, you should be able to do that in 30 seconds or less. If it's a very complicated thing, maybe 40 seconds, but most of the time you should be able to explain the exercise or the technique in 30 seconds or less. Because then you can keep people's attention, and then you spend most of the time actually moving. So whenever we have to learn something, I think it's important to think about the steps that we actually go through. And there's this not very old, but older model of learning. We learned it as the learning spiral, or it's like a cycle. So what happens first is that you're going to have a physical experience. So in order for us to learn something very well, we need to experience it. And then once we have an experience, like a concrete experience, then you go into reflection. And this is where the coach is important. So the coach can help facilitate the reflection, but you could also just do this yourself by asking yourself simple questions like, if I were to do this again, what would happen if I did something different? Or what would I try to do differently to improve the outcome? Or where did I meet resistance? Or what was difficult in executing this movement? And so on and so on. And then once you've gone through the reflection phase, then you go into what they call like abstract thinking. So you have an idea about what would actually happen if I did something different, but you don't actually know yet. So that's why it's abstract. It's just, if I did this, maybe I would get a different outcome. But then the most important thing is that you try to do the movement again, or you try to solve the task again, and then you get a new experience, and then you can go through the cycle again. But sometimes we feel, or I feel like that a lot of coaches try to take that away. So they're actually stealing your ability to learn because you're explaining everything to you, what you should do and what you shouldn't do. So not only are they disturbing the signal, but they're also robbing you of making these experiences and these conclusions on your own, which means that it's going to be more difficult for you to remember because it's someone else that's telling you they're solving the problem instead of you solving the problem. It's the equivalent to having ChatGPT writing your essays or writing your value posts on LinkedIn or whatever it is people are doing. ChatGPT will give you the answer for sure, but it's also stealing away your learning and your ability to be creative because it's just giving you the answer, which is the same thing as a coach giving you the exact steps to go through in a technique, which is why it's so difficult to recall and to remember this because you didn't actually arrive at the conclusion yourself. So I hope that makes sense. You need to go through the cycle in order for you to actually learn and to actually remember and store this information. The next thing that I think a lot of people are either unaware of or they're just not schooled in actually using these things. So there's a term called learning styles, and most people will have a preference for one or the other. So some people prefer to learn stuff by listening to them. that's the type of people that do very well with audiobooks, podcasts without video, or just kind of listening to someone telling them what to do. The other group are people that need to move. They need to experience it themselves. They usually do better with a book if they have to read or absorb some kind of information, because you have the tactile stimulus of actually sitting with the book and turning the pages. These are also the people that you go over to them as a coach and you try to explain to them how the thing that they're trying to do should be done, or like what they should do differently. And they can maybe hold the attention span for 10, 15 seconds, and then they need to move. They need to move in order for them to actually learn something. So I have a coach at the gym that I was training in, and whenever he would explain something, he would always need to go in and do the move himself. So if you had a question for him, he would go in, he would grab your partner, and then in order for him to actually be able to explain or show to you what it is that he's doing, he would have to do it himself. So my conclusion or my reflection is that he's probably very kinesthetic. And I think a lot of people that do sports are in this category. So funny enough, they need to do stuff, experience stuff in order for them to actually learn stuff. They just forget this whenever they're teaching, because in school, oftentimes we're taught in a different way when we're sitting and we're listening. The third one are the visual people. They need to see what's going on, and then from viewing this, they can usually copy it. I'm not saying that you're one or the other, but usually you will have a preference. And then you have the people that need a logical explanation. This is all the people that are a little bit on the autistic side. And it's okay, because it's great in jiu-jitsu, because you can absorb the systems and you have a logical way of putting everything into small boxes. But not all people are like that. Not all people are like John Danaher. I don't know if he's actually autistic, but that's the joke, right? Obviously, we have a lot of gray zone in between. So you're usually not one or the other. Some people are like very much to one extreme, but most people have a little bit of everything, which is good because it makes us adaptable. But you will usually have a preference. And if the coaching style doesn't match this or doesn't actually account for all four, then it's going to be more difficult for you as a learner to actually absorb this information. So I would love to get an idea of where you guys are at in terms of what I've just been talking about. So because you guys represent jiu-jitsu, so it would be interesting to see in the comments where you see yourself. Do you see yourself more as an auditive learner, or someone that's kinesthetic, or someone that's mainly visual, or are you the type of person that needs everything to be logical, that you can put into your boxes? So let me know in the comments below. So I think the discussion about traditional static drilling versus ecological is a very interesting one. And I love all the stuff that Greg Saunders is putting out, Britt Mickelson, all these guys. And you also have some guys in judo that are doing this. And it's kind of shaking up the way people teach. And you have more and more people that are interested in going in this direction. And I think if you haven't tried a session like this, it's definitely worth checking out, because you might experience that you can learn so much more in way less time. For the past 10 years or so, I've been doing what we call play fighting workshops. And what we do here is we usually take people that don't have a fighting background or they don't have a martial arts background, and then we introduce them to grappling through jiu-jitsu. Usually there'll be like a stand-up part, and then we're gradually gonna move into more groundwork. But the interesting thing is that my experience is that I can take people that have never wrestled before, and then through these games that we design, I can take them from never having wrestled before to actually understanding how the pieces move. Like, how am I supposed to move and control my opponent? Where would I rather be versus where would I definitely not be? And how should I move around? Like, how should I move my feet whenever we're on the ground? Like, what am I trying to accomplish? I'm not saying that we can make them great grapplers in one day, but I've experienced that over the course of 2-3 hours doing a workshop like this, we can arrive at a spot or at a point where people can actually engage in grappling. And if you just go in and you look at it, if you came in the door and you were looking at these people grappling, you would think that they'd been training this stuff for a while, maybe 3 months, maybe 6 months. But this is only like 3 hours. Where before, when I was teaching jiu-jitsu, we would usually, people would come in and then you would teach, or we would teach, I would teach a technique or a position, but they didn't get an understanding of the whole game or how every piece moves and the hierarchy of positions. And I think this is a very interesting thing if you start to look at how we're actually bringing people into the sport. So yeah, I would love to know if you are more towards the ecological dynamics approach, constraint-led approach, or if you are hardcore traditionalists, you love your static drilling and you think it's important because of different reasons. But I would love to hear your perspective and your reasons for being in one or the other. Or if you're like me and you're like, I think there's value in this, but I actually prefer being over here or over here, depending on where you're at. Let me know in the comments, and like and subscribe if you want to see more content like this. And I look forward to seeing you back here.